Welcome to Students for Political Engagement. Today we have a special interview with NDP candidate for the riding of Richmond Hill. Welcome, Raymond Bhushan. So, starting on a light note, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do in your free time?
Yeah, so currently I'm a student at University of Toronto. I just finished my second year studying mineral engineering. And I guess a bit about myself, I went to Bayview Secondary School in Richmond Hill, so I've got a, deep connection with the community, got a lot of appreciation for Richmond Hill. And in my spare time, what do I do? Well, I like doing trivia. I like sci-fi. So I'm currently watching The Expanse, and I'm quite excited for the new Kenobi series on Disney for Star Wars. So I'm looking forward to that at the end of the month. I probably will have to watch that after my campaign, but because I won't have time. But
We actually just finished an expense committee for our schools. We go to Richmond Hill High School, and we just finished our Model UN committee for the expense. So that's actually really
oh,
interesting.
that's cool. I did Model UN in high school as well.
Yeah.
Oh, we actually
Fun,
got a lot of. We talk with Bayview Mon quite a bit actually. Yeah, that's pretty cool. My brother went to Bayview.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think Matthew had the next question.
Yes. So I guess going into the policy questions. So as you know, the cost of living in Ontario has been rising steadily. The inflation rate in April was 6%, 6.8% over last year. So what would your party do if elected to try and lower the cost of living and make life more affordable for people in Ontario?
Well, the first thing we would do, we would bring in universal mental health care, and we would bring in dental care for the majority of families. That would save. Sorry, I'm getting a call. Turn my phone off.
No, it's absolutely fine.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so we're going to bring in mental health care and dental care. That will lower costs for a lot of people. If your family gets braces and you're uninsured, that'll save the average family $12,000. And just regular checkups, it'll save hundreds of dollars for the average family. On top of our healthcare expansions, we're also going to be focusing on groceries and gas. As we know, the price of groceries and the price of gas has gone way up. And part of that is because of price gouging. The price of oil is actually going down, but the price of gas is still continuing to rise. So obviously it's not because of inflation or because of the price of oil. It's because these gas companies are currently gouging us at the gas station, and there's no regulation to stop them. So what the NDP is going to do, we're going to bring in regulation to prevent them from gouging us at the gas station and jacking up prices to points that are beyond affordable. On top of that, we're going to be having huge expansions to housing. We have one of the best housing plans in the election, and part of that includes building more homes and bringing in rent control, because currently what we have is the Ford government made it so that any new units after 2018 don't have any rent control. And on top of that, there's no vacancy rent control. So let's say there's a period in time between two tenants, then rent control does not apply for that period. So if I were a landlord, I could say have no tenant for a month, and then when a new tenant comes in, I could raise their rent prices way higher than the previous tenant. So we're going to do that. We're going to build more housing, and we're going to bring in rent control.
Thank you. So I think related to housing and also gas prices, right, is I think the idea of transportation and ease of access to getting around and things like that. So, and of course, as a suburban riding as Richmond Hill, our residents often rely on driving to get around. So how, as an NDP government, would you work to improve transit, and what would you do for transit for Richmond Hill and also Ontario?
Yeah, so I've got a big personal connection to transit. I took the bus, I took the YRT basically every single day for 4 years. So I know what it's like. Currently, the province funds 6% of the YRT's operating budget, which is kind of pathetic if you think about it. It's really like 6%, especially for a community as populous as York Region. We got about 1 million people. So we need to have more funding for our YRT. The NDP wants to bring that to 50%, which is equivalent to an increase in $223 million. So that means we have more money in the YRT to hire more drivers, to buy more buses, to create new routes. And I think that'll help because one of the biggest problems with public transportation is that it's often infrequent, especially the YRT, and the lines don't always bring you where you want to go. So if we bring in more funding, that means we can buy more buses and hire more drivers, which means frequency goes up and access and coverage goes up, which will benefit any public transportation system, especially the YRT.
So, of course, in York Region, we have sort of course, the frequent rapid transit of Viva that is the somewhat less frequent, more localized services of YRT, which is more, YRT, of course, is more in the public area. So what is the NDP's stance on, I guess, the relationship between Viva and YRT?
Well, I'm not too familiar with the specific nuances of that relationship, but I do know that we're hesitant to use the public-private partnerships. I know previous Liberal and Conservative governments have relied heavily on P3s when it comes to public transportation. And we don't think that's a good idea because, frankly, they've been shown time and time again to cost taxpayers and to cost users money. Viva is quite expensive, both to the taxpayer and to people who use it. And part of the reason is because of the reliance on P3s. You know, the Auditor General found that the government of Ontario spent an extra $8 billion over 9 years on wasteful P3 projects. So we want to take out the P3s from public transportation. And I know Viva has some reliance on these P3s, so we want to get rid of that.
And just a quick last follow-up on transit, of course, is the importance of the relationship between the province and the city when it comes to transportation. So what are your thoughts on, I guess, two things that are somewhat related? One is the subway alignment that is coming into Richmond Hill, and two, on ministerial zoning orders from the province.
Yeah, so I've heard a lot about the Yonge-North extension and the MZOs. First, when talking about the Yonge extension, I think it doesn't really make sense that it veers off underneath established communities and then goes above ground. And it shares a line with existing freight train. It's a way that it's a plan that the province put in place to save themselves money, but it doesn't make sense. It's a Yonge subway, right? So it should stick to Yonge to the street. So I think we need to look back at the original Plan 1. I know Plan 3 is very unpopular with respect to the Yonge-North extension. So I think we have to look at Plan 1 and have actual consultation with the community, because that's the problem. The Ford government is saying they're doing consultation. They're saying, oh, look, we've spoken to the community. But when the community says they don't like the project, he just ignores them. And that's, frankly, a failure of the provincial government. And the same holds true with these MZOs. For those of you who don't know, there is a proposed development project around Yonge and Highway 7, which would bring in 67 new condos, which are around 40 to 80 stories tall. And, you know, I've lived in downtown Toronto for school. The place I live at is 30 stories tall. So this would be over double that, which is frankly kind of crazy for a place like Richmond Hill, because we're bringing in 60 to 80,000 new people, which isn't necessarily bad until you realize that we don't have the proper services for those new people. We don't have jobs being created. We don't have schools being built. We don't have hospital beds being built. We don't have the parks, the community centers, the skating rinks to service all those new people. And the public transportation that they want to bring in, you know, the Yonge subway extension, that's not going to be here for another 7 to 10 years. So we are bringing in all these people, but we're not putting in the investments to service them. And part of the reason why we can't even do that in the first place is because Richmond Hill is a suburban community that doesn't have the same infrastructure in place that downtown Toronto has. So we can't accommodate 80-story tall mega condos. So what the NDP is proposing instead is, instead of focusing on ultra high density, right, we should focus on medium density. We need to build missing middle housing, things like townhouses, low-rise apartments, duplexes and triplexes that fit more with the atmosphere of Richmond Hill and are also better served by the existing infrastructure. We've seen how successful medium density housing works in suburban Montreal, for example. Those communities are livable, they're walkable, they have great access to public transportation. And I think Richmond Hill would do well to emulate those communities. But at the end of the day, Richmond Hill isn't downtown Toronto, and we shouldn't be developing it like it is.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I think Jacqueline has a question now.
Yeah, in light of what you have said previously about mental health care, in light of the COVID-19 crisis, problems within our healthcare system has come to light. And the NDP says that it has a plan that strives to better the healthcare system. What are some key elements to this plan that differentiates it from the plans of other parties?
Well, there will be some similarity between the parties. I know, for example, the Liberals say they want to end private long-term care. The NDP says they want to do it. So at the end of the day, there is this sort of overlap, which I'm happy to admit, right? What the NDP wants to do, we want to, like I mentioned, end private long-term care. We want to repeal Bill 124. We want to increase the wages of PSWs by $5 an hour at least. And we want to bring in mental health care to help deal with some of the side effects of the pandemic. And I think mental health care is one of the big ones, also dental care. We also want to invest in ending the surgery backlog. As we know, due to COVID-19, there's been a massive backlog in our surgery, and it's not helped by the fact that Doug Ford actually cut money from our healthcare system. So in the middle of a pandemic, Doug Ford decides, okay, we're going to bring in this new budget that actually lowers the amount of money we're spending on healthcare, which doesn't make sense because, like I mentioned, we have this backlog of surgeries that need to be done that were postponed because of COVID. So the NDP wants to invest money to actually finish that backlog and get people the surgeries that they've been waiting for 2 to 3 years.
Just a quick question, just for people at home who may not know, what is Bill 124?
So Bill 124 is legislation that Ford brought in that effectively freezes the wages of nurses and other public sector workers. And in fact, it actually serves as a wage decrease because the wages won't even be increased with inflation, if my understanding is correct. So basically what this is saying is these nurses who are healthcare heroes, right? We've been saying, nurses are heroes. They've been sacrificing their health and their time on the front lines of the pandemic. And so many of them have actually suffered from illness due to COVID-19. And we're saying to these nurses, thank you for your help. Thank you for everything you've done for the province. And now we're going to be lowering your wages. That doesn't make sense. So I think it makes sense why we want to repeal it. I think anybody who's been paying attention for the last 2 years should want to repeal Bill 124.
Yeah, interesting answer. So just going off of the COVID-19 topic, education has been a sector that has also been affected, and it's an important issue to us students. So just according to a study done by the People of Education, 90% of Ontario principals have said that finding teachers for schools has been a challenge during the pandemic. So what could you offer to combat this issue and other similar problems we face in education?
Well, there are a lot of problems with our education system and that have been festering for decades now. I'll give you one example. We have a $17 billion repair backlog. So we have these necessary repairs that we need to do in schools. You know, a lot of schools are suffering from mold or crumbling infrastructure. I don't know how it is in RHHS, but I know a lot of schools do have that problem. So for the past 2 decades, liberal and conservative governments have been pushing back these investments to fix our schools. So that's one thing we would do. We would end the school repair backlog. With respect to hiring more teachers, I think part of the problem is that the government currently doesn't respect teachers. I remember in 2018, 2019, the Students Say No movement and the huge backlash that both teachers and students had to Ford's massive cuts to education. So I was there in the protest. I was protesting the Ford government in 2019. And it's because the government doesn't respect teachers. I think that's part of the reason why we're having trouble hiring new teachers. If we undo his increases to the class size, if we, increase if we end the mandatory online learning, because he brought in I think it was 2 or 4 mandatory credits that have to be done online without the supervision of teachers. I think those are 2 major key points that we need to deal with, because it basically proves, the Ford government doesn't have the best interests of teachers at their heart. Why would anybody want to work for an employer if the employer doesn't actually care about them, right?
Great. Yeah, thank you. I think we were also, I was in school at least when the Students Say No movement happened as well. So yeah.
Yes. So our next question, relates to energy. So Ontario is a province that relies a lot on nuclear energy. Almost 60% of our electricity comes from nuclear. And with a lot of Ontario's nuclear power plants, like the Pickerington plant, their design lifespans ending in around 2024. What would the NDP do to fill that void in Ontario's energy production and in the supply of energy generally?
Yeah, so the aging of nuclear plants is actually really concerning, because our emissions in the energy sector are actually projected to increase by 400 to 600% if nothing is done. So we need to have really drastic action within the next couple of years if we want to avert huge emissions from our electricity sector. So what the NDP is proposing, we want to build more renewable sources. So that's things like hydropower, solar, wind, geo-exchange. These are all technologies that exist, technologies that have been proven to work, technologies that have already been put into place in Ontario. So we're going to build more of that because we know that it works. The problem is, the Ford government, they spent $231 million actually dismantling a wind farm that was already built. So not only is the current government apathetic towards renewable energy, they're actually actively hostile against it. So the NDP is actually going to actively invest in renewable energy instead of tearing it out of the ground. Not only that, we want to end our reliance on gas power by 2030. Right now, about 6% of our energy is produced by gas, our electricity is produced by gas, but that number is a bit misleading, because part of the way we use gas is that during peak hours, we turn on our gas plants, and during during off hours, we turn them off. So during these peak hours, in the middle of the day, our gas percent is actually closer to 30-40%. So the 6% is actually a bit of a misnomer. So it's actually a bigger problem than a lot of people realize. So the NDP has a solid plan to get rid of gas power by 2030.
So, of course, the nuclear power plants in Pickering not only provide electricity, but are also an important source of jobs for the area. So how will the NDP ensure that when an NDP government would reinvest in renewable energies to replace nuclear power plants, how would they ensure that some of the employment and job opportunities that exist surrounding these areas would stay with those areas?
Yeah, so part of our environmental policy is retraining workers who currently work in sectors that may not exist in 10 to 20 years. I'll use a different example, but I think it highlights the same point. Mechanics. We want to bring in a retraining program for mechanics so that those working on, gas engines know how to switch to work on electric engines, because by, 2030, 2040, those are going to be the majority of cars on the road, electric vehicles. So we want to change mechanics from their knowledge on gas guzzling engines into electric batteries. And we want to have similar retraining programs for different workers in the sector, and that would include workers in nuclear who may no longer work in nuclear if those plants shut down.
So I guess on the topic of retraining, you of course are in university, and so on a lighter note about you as a student being in politics, and of course us being a group for students being engagement, I guess that makes this interview a bit interesting in the sense that we were curious about your activeness in politics and how you, I guess, got into politics, and what that path was like, especially as a university student.
So I've always been sort of interested in politics. When I was in grade 8, that would have been the 2015 election. I was a big Tom Mulcair supporter. mostly because I really liked his beard. So that was one of the big reasons, I guess. And I guess since then, I've always been really interested in how politics works. In high school, during the 2019 election, I volunteered in Markham Unionville, and I helped with one of their candidates. And then when I moved downtown for university, there was a by-election in 2020, and that's how I really got involved with the NDP. So there was a by-election for, what was his name? Bill Morneau. When he resigned, there was a by-election in Toronto Centre. So I was helping the NDP candidate there, Brian Chang, a good friend of mine. So since then, I've always been like really involved in the NDP. I got an invitation from the Toronto Centre exec to join their EDA. And since then, I've been helping out with their campaigns. I helped out in 2021 during their federal election there. And in high school, I guess, I also was part of the student paper. So I wrote a couple of articles about politics. I wrote one about the federal election, and I wrote another one about municipal politics. So it's always been sort of an interest to me. And one of the interesting things is, as an engineering student, politics isn't really something that a lot of people think about or talk about. If you're in, like political science or something like that, of course, it's what most people care about. But in engineering, people aren't really focused about politics. So when I mention how engaged I am, sometimes people are surprised because they're like, "Oh, really? I didn't really think about politics that much." So it's definitely an interesting dynamic in engineering, at least.
And lastly, of course, engineering is a pretty intense course. So how do you balance, I guess, your campaigning and potentially representing this writing and your work at university?
So my semester finished at the end of April, so all of May I'm pretty much free to do campaigning. But if I were elected, then I would have to look at, dialing back my studies, because at the end of the day, being an MPP is a full-time job. A lot of times you'll have, even 80-hour, 90-hour work weeks in more intense times. So I don't know if it would not be possible to balance full-time university and being an MPP. So I would have to pull back, either become a part-time student or just pause my studies for however many years. But yeah, it is a challenging balance as a university student, but I think most people would be able to handle it.
All right, thank you.
Yes, and I think one more follow-up on the scenario of if you were elected. So if you were elected as an MPP in this election, what would be the first issue that you would, sort of try to get progress on in the Legislative Assembly?
First issue would definitely be the MZOs that I was talking about. Whenever I talk to people in the community, that's like one of the biggest things. Like maybe 50-60% of people I talk to mention that at least one time, because a lot of people are just concerned about it for the reasons I mentioned earlier. So I would want to try to get that repealed and try to get it, try to work with city council to come up with a more acceptable solution. Because part of the NDP's plan is that we don't like the use of MZOs when they're used to force provincial government policies onto cities. Cities should be our partners. They're not like these ants that need to be squished by the provincial government. So I think that would be the first thing I would do.
All right, thank you so much. I think that concludes our interview.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you guys for hosting this.
Right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Keep up the good work, guys. It's good to see more young people in politics.
Right.
You too, as a young person in politics.
For sure.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Good one.
Right.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.